Okay, thank you very much indeed. Firstly, apologies to those millions watching on the live stream that we've started late. Apologies, I got waylaid by a council tenant. So thank you very much for coming. My name is Darren Sanders. I'm the Liberal Democrat member for the Baffins electoral ward, and I'm the Cabinet member for Housing and Tackling Homelessness. Before I go through the agenda, there's some just bureaucracy, safety bureaucracy I have to go through, which is that if the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Don't use the lifts. Please assemble in front, it says in the front of, but it's in front of Queen Victoria statue in Guildhall Square, in order to comply with the fire marshal regulations of the Guildhall Trust, whose building we're using today. Anyone who signed in at the reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. As I've said, this meeting is being live streamed. Hello to everyone watching or watching on catch-up. Everyone speaking via a microphone will be on camera, sorry, and that will include those making deputations, sorry. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly they don't want to be recorded. Please use the microphones, it says here. And please remember to switch off when you have finished. After that level of bureaucracy, I will start by introducing everyone else and hope the camera works. Alison.
Alison Harper, Democratic Services.
And I'll go along the back and then move snake to the front with the important people last.
Sally Scattergood, Assistant Director of Housing.
Good morning, Mark Fitch, Head of Local Authority Housing.
Good morning, Meredith Hughes, Assistant Director, Buildings.
James Hill, Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services.
Andrew Malbon, Acting Head of Design Service.
Adam Hardwick, Assistant Director, Buildings.
Steve Groves, Head of Building Maintenance.
Alan Denford, Housing Group Accountant.
And then Maria.
Maria Cole, Residents Consortium.
Thank you very much, Maria. The person I know is Charlotte.
Councillor Charlotte Gerarda, Labour Councillor for Central Southsea.
Thank you.
Cal Corkery, Councillor for Charles Dickens Ward and Opposition Spokesperson for Housing.
Thank you.
Councillor Daniel Weems for Hillsey.
Thank you very much, and also the Conservative spokesperson on housing as well. So thanks all for coming. I have one apology from today, which is from Councillor Raymond Dent. Have you got that? Is there anyone else? Alison?
No, nobody else, thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Does anyone have anything interesting to declare? No. Okay, that's lovely. Right, we move to item 3, which is called Public Artwork on Council Housing Blocks and Estates, and I have both Andrew Malbon and James Hill to discuss this. Thank you. Andrew, if you start, please.
Thank you, Councillor Sanders, and good morning, everybody. By way of introduction, you'll have read the report, I'm sure, so I'll just give a brief summary to what we're hoping to achieve and why this report is being presented to you today. So over the past decade or so, we've been lucky enough to be able to engage with local artists when working on our portfolio of education projects. The success of this has naturally led to more interest from other artists and indeed our other clients. This report looks to establish a simple, a formal and a rigorous mechanism to assess the practicality and appropriateness of any approaches that might come from an artist or a group of artists seeking to carry out a project in an area that's owned or managed by the City Council. As you might be aware, Articulate Sage, a business management company who specialise in the arts, are looking to organise a paint festival in this city this autumn, bringing together a group of local, national and internationally known artists. Articulate Sage have approached PCC with a list of our locations that they would like to include in the festival, and these sites are briefly illustrated in Appendix 4. The report includes an acknowledgement, and we're very grateful for our colleagues in Culture and Leisure for their comments on this matter specifically, that should funding become available in the future, then PCC may wish to commission work of this nature ourselves. This, of course, these circumstances, of course, would require a separate report setting out the procurement principles to help ensure variety and diversity in any work commissioned, as well as reinforcing the principles of full engagement with our residents living in and around the buildings proposed to be included. The recommendations of the report are set out in the document, on the first page of the document. So that's our brief introduction. Councillor Sanders.
Okay, thank you for that, Andrew. At this stage, I go to people to make comments before I go last, starting with Maria.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is a brilliant report. I think there's nothing more depressing for people when they're walking around streets of any city to see blank walls in front of them, even walls that have had imitation windows and things painted on, are uplifting. It helps our mental health, actually, because it cheers us up. I'm particularly thinking of where the building is going to be starting for the Horatio and Leamington site. There's hoardings around there that people have actually helped. We've had local artists as well as, I've got my handprint on there somewhere. And it doesn't get damaged. People know that something's happening in their community and they want to be part of it. So they take on sort of ownership even of temporary hoardings. One point that I would like to bring up under 4.1.1, the installation being budget neutral. I know that you're going to be looking for support from different people, including HRA contractors. Have you thought also about paint manufacturers who might like to donate paint? I think we got Johnson's Paint, and so that's just...
Thank you. That's a very good point, and thank you for the comments on the report. And you're quite right about the mental health aspects. The works that we've carried out in some very challenging environments in our schools, they're so respected. It's brilliant to see. Actually, it's very moving. On the subject of the paint manufacturers, that's a very good idea, and I'll mention that to Articulate Sage, who are providing the funding for this project, and see if they can do that. It's a particular type of paint that tends to get used, but there's often a lot of kind of emulsion. It's not always emulsion, but basically tidying up the background so that the images stand out a bit more. So thank you for that. That's very good. Good comment.
Can I just make a...
You can say what you like.
The first time, when I first moved initially to Portsmouth 19 years ago, I was living in Festing Grove, and one of the first pieces of public artwork I saw was the map of Southsea, not far from the beach. And I thought, wow, this city's alive, it's not dead like Plymouth. But I've noticed that there is lots of artwork going up from My Dog Size, and there's lots of things been going on in Somerstown. They've got the Mosaic Lane with the mosaics. They've got painting around Cottage Grove, Shaw Start, Omega Street. There's decorations of blank spaces, and that's what we need, just fill in the blanks. Thank you.
There's no need to apologise, Maria. Thank you very much. Alison, could you note the bit about the paint manufacturers in the minutes so that everybody knows that will be chased up? Okay, thank you. Charlotte.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you also for the report. I completely agree with Maria. I think it's an absolutely fantastic idea, and it's a really great way to brighten up our city and lift neighbourhoods, which is great. Also, we have some fantastic local artists that are gaining international attention, which is brilliant as well. So it's great for us to have an opportunity to celebrate and recognise those artists and have them feature in our city, which is great. I think something that is featured in the report that's obviously going to be really critical is community engagement. That's obviously important for making sure that there is artwork that works in a particular area, that it is wanted and it is appropriate for that particular space, but also for the longevity as well, because Maria's absolutely right. A piece of art is highly unlikely to be graffitied over if the local community have actually have an involvement and engagement in it, and therefore appreciate and value the work. So that's going to be really critical to make sure that it survives in the long term. I did just have a question on the same bullet that Maria pointed out in 4.11 on page 7. Third bullet point down around the budget neutrality. I just wanted to double check around the funding sources, because obviously we want local artists to get paid for their work, and I just wondered what funding sources might be identified to pay for the artwork. Thank you.
I think paying the artists is always assumed in that piece of work. But Andrew, could you clarify that point from Charlotte, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and thank you, Councillor Herita. The work is to be funded by the company, by Articulate Sage. They've got a grant at the moment from the Arts Council, and they're looking for other sponsorship around. So the budget neutrality, the contribution that we would make would be in kind. So it would be like my time to assist with the organisation of it and the speaking to the residents, etc. So we're not looking for any budget from the HRA.
Okay, do you have any other questions, Charlotte? No? Okay, that's fine. Cal?
Thanks, Darren. So particular interest in this, obviously, as one of the Councillors Charles Dickens Awards, because I think 15 odd of the 17 examples or scoping sites listed in our area. And we've met a couple of times with the people that are proposing the paint festival to kind of understand exactly what it is they're wanting to do and also feed into that process in terms of hopefully developing a successful project. Some of the points that we've made in those discussions also kind of relevant to be made today, picking up on the point that Charlotte has talked about and has also mentioned in the report, the importance of kind of resident engagement, but also I'll go further that and say kind of meaningful resident engagement, because there's different ways in which you can engage with people and there's different kind of depths you can go to, and I would always advocate for the kind of most meaningful and most significant form of engagement possible. I'd actually like to see, if possible, residents kind of brought into the whole process rather than just being asked, is this okay with you? Or what would you like to see on this wall? Are there opportunities for those residents to be kind of actively involved in the creation of these pieces of work? And are there also then potentially employment and training opportunities that go alongside that? Particularly if some of these pieces of work are being delivered by internationally renowned artists, that's great. They've kind of, by definition, already built successful careers. There's plenty of people in those communities who may be interested in similar themes but perhaps not had those opportunities or not been able to take forward that interest. So if there's any opportunity for them to be brought into that, then that would be, I think, a good thing. In terms of funding, just for awareness, we have agreed to fund it partly through our neighbourhood SIL funding alongside the Arts Council and other funding pots. I also think that it would be useful for us to kind of use these opportunities to promote, as well as the already successful artists who do great work for our city and kind of really positive pieces of work that we see popping up all around. Also for there to be opportunities for not so well-renowned artists joining people that are maybe kind of up and coming that would benefit from those opportunities alongside that. And yeah, I think that was pretty much all I was going to say. I'd say those points are kind of, I appreciate, mostly covered in the report and also in the comments already made, but I just wanted to echo them again based on the discussions that we've had outside of these meetings with the proposers.
That's kind, Cal. I'll return to some of those if I may. James.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Sanders. Completely agree with those comments, and just to reassure members that the report's doing a few things. It's asking you to agree a process with which and core principles with which we can use as and when we're approached by artists or artist communities to use our buildings. The discussions with Articulate Sage are already happening, but we've been really clear with them as an organisation that the festival and the use of council buildings is subject to your decision today, and also then the application of the core principles and process you agree today. And at the heart of that is that residents in the blocks, recognising their residential blocks, are absolutely the heart of the choice, the engagement, and you know how we take forward any piece of art on a housing area. So the process itself and the core principles will enable us to manage on your behalf contacts from this point forward, as well as work with Articulate Sage and hopefully take the opportunity that's presented to have a festival in Portsmouth. We have also included the reach for Havant blocks, recognising that you're a significant housing landlord in Havant, and at this point the Articulate Sage Festival focuses on Portsmouth, but in the future there could be further opportunity to incorporate blocks in Havant as well. My building services colleagues are probably sat on their hands, but it is worth saying the report does draw to attention that whilst there will be considerations as to the choice and appropriateness of buildings for this type of artwork, it's safe to say that not every blank wall can just have paint applied to it. There's all sorts of things that are beyond me in terms of technicality of bricks breathing and all this sort of thing. So the report tries to balance all of the interests as to whether or not a building, a wall, etc. is appropriate, but give us an opportunity to do the very thing that you're saying, which is improve, across the housing estates, artwork, and using the Pompey Pelican as a really good example of where this has worked very well.
Well, thanks for that, James. Cal, did you have any other questions or comments at all? Okay, thank you. Daniel.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm basically just going to echo what my colleagues have said and say it's a fantastic scheme. Like everywhere I go, when I travel, I always look for the local art scene because it's quite like a nice thing to do. In terms of Portsmouth, we've had a lot of art installations around the Lido, and one of the things I noticed is when you have these incredible pieces of art, it brings people from the community over, and I noticed that the Hillsey Lions probably had one of its busiest weekends over that period where everyone was getting involved, and I think this scheme would naturally progress to other parts of the city. The only thing which I think was touched on by Charlotte Gerarda and as well as Cal is how are we getting the community buy-in in that sense? Because one of the things I noticed with the Lido is it got graffitied quite quickly, which was quite sad to see. But one of the pieces of graffiti was really good, surprisingly. So I just wanted to know how we could get maybe those who have the capability to create wonderful pieces of art who may feel like they're not being consulted with. So I'm not saying, I'm trying to word this the correct way, but having maybe someone who would be more likely to do criminal graffiti, how do we get them on board? How do we show that there is spaces for them and how they can actually put their art in a positive manner rather than a negative manner? So I thought that'd be something we could possibly look into, because I think there's a lot of young people out there, especially in Hillsey, because we've got a lot of ASB who may think this scheme isn't for them, but if we could incorporate them into it, that'd be brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Daniel. Do officers have any response to that at all?
I mean, I think this report focuses specifically on council buildings that the housing service own, but the conversations, as Andrew alluded to, with culture and leisure are very much about taking an approach that's citywide and looking at not only this, but as part of a public arts kind of strategy for the whole city, which will also include opportunities for local artists to have access to walls and that kind of thing. So whilst we don't talk about it in here, we can certainly encourage anyone that approaches us to connect with local artists. But it will be something to take away and talk to our colleagues in Culture and Leisure as they develop a public art strategy for the city as a whole.
Thank you, James. Was there anything else, Daniel? No, that's fine. Thank you very much indeed. Firstly, thank you for all the comments. I mean, for us as a Liberal Democrat administration, and culture-led regeneration is really quite important, but what that means underneath the slogan differs. I think from my perspective from the council housing side, as I've seen, I have a very great deal of sympathy with everything Cal said, and I will be more classist than he was. Because too often culture-led regeneration has, and it comes actually back to something Daniel said as well, touched on, which is too often it's basically been for posh people and middle-class people, and particularly ordinary working people have felt not involved in regeneration. I remember there was a piece of public art outside my mother's old block on Horatia House, in which, in fact, the only significant thing was that you had a high chance of injuring yourself, which is not great. And so it is absolutely crucial that people are involved, Cal, as much as possible. I mean, I suspect you and I both like the idea of, people from council estates becoming artists, because that's a good way and it's a good way out. And that's something I'm very keen to encourage. It's not in here because essentially this report is doing two processes. Firstly, it's a process by which people can be involved, which has often not happened in too many regeneration projects of any type in the past. The second one is how to deal with articulate and what is coming up, and making sure that they are aware of the need to involve local people as much as possible. But certainly Officer colleagues Cal's idea of working with ordinary working people on our estates to try and encourage them to be part of the artistic scene, I think is a major way out of actually making, removing the perception of culture and art and public art as being elitist, because that's something we're very keen as an administration to break down, and Cal articulated it better than I did. I think the Pompey Pelican, I mean, I've not had any complaints from Cal, Kirsty and Yinka, frankly, about it, so I'm thinking that's okay. And I think that's a very, very good example of what happens when it works. It won't work all the time, but I think it is important that it works. I think Daniel's points around Hilsea Lido and actually involving people are also very pertinent. I mean, we're developing a mural. We're going to have a mural, hopefully, on the wall in the library in my ward on Tangier Road, and we're going to involve the local schools, and we're going to involve local children, because it's absolutely right that they're involved and they're part of the future. I think following on from that, and that piece of involvement, lies also issues around funding, which I think we have picked up, colleagues, and I think that's also quite important. But as far as I can see, this is a really good idea. And that's why, several of the points that you've all made, I made when I first heard about this. And frankly, I made when we did Arundel Street as well. So I'm delighted I'm not alone. But this is really great, colleagues. Please get on. Please involve local people. Let local ward councillors know when it happens, which will mainly be Cal, Kirsty and Yinka. But please do that. And this is a really great idea. What I don't want is cultural vandalism, otherwise known as, painting over something that has happened in Southsea and happened in Stoke Newington with Banksy. We can't have cultural vandalism. We should be encouraging people as part of that to do that. And again, that's one of Daniel's points that was raised earlier. And I think how we do that as part of community payback as well is one for later, but we've got a process here now. Thankfully, let's make it work. Here endeth the missive. So thank you very much, colleagues, for those constructive points. I think the report is hereby approved. Is that right? All right, thank you for that, colleagues. Point 2, item 4, is the intriguingly titled Management of Energy Provision in Local Authority Housing Whilst Void. Meredith. Mark, oh, you've done this in rehearsals, have you? Marvellous.
Sorry, Darren.
Just apologise.
Mark is going to introduce a report from a housing point of view, and I'll add some just some pointers around the procurement and legal work we've done.
Lovely.
Thank you very much. The purpose of the report is to recommend an improved system of managing gas and electric supplies in local authority housing stock whilst it's empty, void, vacant. And the report highlights the benefits of a new system, both for the tenants and for the HRA, the Housing Revenue Account. So there are a number of recommendations that we'll get to at the end. But basically, we did bring this report to Cabinet in 2021 at the point of the utility crisis and crash. And Utilita have been back in contact with us and are now offering the service back to local authorities and other major landlords. So the idea of the service is that currently the way that we work is that when the property becomes empty, we don't necessarily know who the utility providers are. There's a considerable amount of time spent identifying who the provider is, both by the Housing Office and by Building Services. We then become responsible for those utility costs whilst the property is empty, and then have to change the name of the contract to the new tenant when the new tenant moves in. That process takes up a considerable amount of time and is very complicated and delays the void process. And within the report, there are some figures in terms of the costs. So we've got approximately 15,000 homes. Between 700 and 900 of those become void every year. So it's not an insignificant number of properties that we're talking about. And the report goes through the issues with credit meters, prepayment meters, card meters, and the issues that we face with each one of those. But we are spending a significant amount of money on both the costs of utilities and time it takes for us to resolve those issues. The service by utilitor means that when we get notice from a tenant to leave the property, we log the details onto a portal, which is Utilities portal, with a void date. They would then make arrangements to fit a smart meter to the property, which enables remote reading of energy use. The void works can be carried out. The contractor has no issues with trying to establish who the providers are for gas and electric. And then when the new tenant moves in, we upload their details onto the portal, and again they get supplied with gas and electric from the day they move into the property. There is no tie-in to new tenants to stay with Utilita for gas and electric. They can change their supplier from day one when they move into the property, so they're not tied into that at all. It will just mean it's a much simpler process for us. All our properties will be converted to smart meters, and it will be easier for us and our tenants to manage.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. From a procurement and legal point of view, Councillor Sanders, we've worked closely with both departments since we established the first pilot, small-scale pilot, back in 2021. Since the energy crisis, the landscape has changed in terms of the number of companies offering this service, so the landscape has changed, and also there was talk within the industry of actually the service offer of changing, etc. So we were keen to re-establish the relationship with Utilita to roll out this pilot across the whole of the PCC maintained stock, and to really to establish whether that Utilita could operate on the scale across the whole of PCC stock, confirmation of a continued positive service for our residents. We could determine the full scale of the savings available to PCC, and also get a quantum of the contractor and also PCC efficiencies generated by getting Utilita on board. The other opportunities that we've got within this pilot scheme, we've worked with procurement on this, is are there additional areas of benefit where they can support us? And there's a fledgling part of their business which is looking around to commercial properties as well, where perhaps tenants of commercial buildings leave, and there's that establishment of the same problems with void warehouses, etc. And our colleagues in regeneration are keen to talk with us in Utilita about that taking forward. So there's still opportunities to move forward. But as I say, the market is still volatile, and certainly as there will be a public concession regulation contract going forward, we're keen to establish the principles, the size of it going forward, and the arrangements that we've got with procurement is during the 2-year pilot we will establish then a procurement and tender process. And so I think we're looking to establish this from beginning of September, maybe August, depending on the paperwork, etc. And we'd look then to get something perhaps established, a new contract, by Easter 2025.
Thank you for that, Meredith. Before I come to Maria, Alison, a small process point. Hello. This item is not on the Council's website. I choose not to get paper copies of these meetings, so I work off the website, frankly. And this particular item is not on this section of the website. No. So whilst I don't think that will affect the discussion we have here, it's important that we're open and transparent with people, especially as this is going to affect our council tenants more obviously than possibly anything else. Maria.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to say that I was at that initial meeting in 2021, so I'm really, really glad to see this report back on the agenda because it's tying up a loose end. I don't want there to be too many loose ends for me when I leave. Right, I'm really pleased about this. The thing that the problems that are highlighted for the tenants going into void properties is exactly what happened to me. I didn't know who the gas and electric were with. It took me ages to find out, and when I let those people know I didn't want to stay with them, I had an awful lot of trouble getting changed over. So I think a company that the council are happy with taking over immediately a property becomes void has got to be good, especially with the reassurance for the incoming tenant to know that if they don't want to stay with Utilita, it's perfectly fine for them to move on to somewhere else. I'm also, let's try and keep these in order. Standing charges, 4.1.4. I know Martin Lewis from the Martin Lewis Money Show has been trying for years to get something done about the standing charges. We're almost paying as much for standing charges as we are now for our fuel. And I think that's something that people need to be perhaps trying to get onto government to do something about. I don't know who would be the appropriate people, but I think it's really bad that standing charges are so bad for people. And finally, using lots of highlighter pen here. 6.2, really good to know that vulnerable customers are going to be put onto the priority services register. I've been in Ladywood 18 months, and it took me quite a while to get through to gas, electric, water to get onto their priority registers. And it's good to know that the gas and electric are going to have a £5 credit. I'm not sure how long a £5 credit would last, but literally in the first couple of days that you're moving into a property, the last thing you want to do is be looking for a shop that does a key meter when you want to change over to a credit meter. So yes, I think this is a brilliant report, and I'm very much in favour of it. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Maria. Daniel.
Thank you, Chair. I'll have to kind of agree with what Maria was saying, actually. It seems like I'm repeating a lot of people, but the report's really good. I just have one question in terms of one of the recommendations. There's going to be a 2-year pilot. I just wanted to know how you're going to update us all during that pilot stage. I always like, well, for me personally, I like to get regular updates when things are going through schemes like this. I also wanted to comment on that, the fact that £40,000 is going to be approximately saved, which is excellent. I just wanted to know whether that £40,000 will actually be reinvested into another officer possibly, or how that money will get spent. But other than that, I think it's really good. In terms of the standing charge, I'll happily see if I can speak to my boss about that and see if she's happy to write a letter or something.
Thanks, Daniel. I'm also happy to have a chat with you offline as well to see how we can facilitate that. That's an excellent point from Maria. Maired.
Yeah, thank you, Darren. Just to answer Councillor Weems' query then about the update, the intention is to bring our update report probably between, I don't know, 9 and 12 months after we've been running the pilot. So we've got some churn going through the system, so we can articulate, you know, how it's working, the benefits, you know, some of the queries that we might be having, etc. And probably then with an intention, maybe a decision actually to go forward then to do the full tender process based on our learnings to date. So the intention would be to bring something probably, maybe the first report into the new municipal year next year.
Do you mind if I interrupt? Is that all right? Maired, that's lovely. And I think there's two aspects of this. There's the public and transparent side, because there's a lot of commercial confidentiality that's going to be knocking around this particular thing. For people who don't know, now the 5 of us will have regular updates, just chats about how things are going, how things can be improved and things like that. So I think there's a possibility of having a deeper discussion around this as in one of those 5-way chats, if that's all right. That's not to override the public process, it's just that for reasons I'll come to when it's my turn, there's certain bits of information that are just commercially confidential, so in the public domain would be a bit tough. But your general point, I think, should be noted at Alison. Daniel, did you have anything else? No, Cal.
Thanks, Darren. I think the report sets out pretty clearly what the benefits and the efficiencies are from the perspective of the council as landlord. I'm just curious to kind of improve my understanding a bit more of the experience from the tenant's perspective. So I've got a couple of questions, if that's okay. The first one is, how will this process differ from the perspective of a new tenant moving in to the current process if they're not part of the trial?
In terms of current process, we will have identified during the void process through sometimes a really painful exercise who the gas and electric suppliers are. We'd have done all of the void works, contractors would have paid for gas and electric while the property is empty, and then when the new tenant moves in, when we do the sign up, we will tell them who the new providers are, or the current providers are, in terms of the supply, but then the day they move in, they have to make contact with that provider to say they're the new tenant and want to sign up from that day. And again, sometimes that can take a couple of hours to get through to the provider to register the details and those sorts of things. With the utility service, everything is done on an online portal. So the day we do the sign up with the tenant, we'll put their details onto the utility portal, and they'll be made contact proactively from utility to say we're supplying your gas and electric from the day you move in. It's a smart meter, so they'll have all the meter readings, and they'll know that they then have got that choice to pay by prepayment, move it to a credit meter, or to change to a different provider. But that will all be done for them, so they'll have no hassle at all the day one when they move in.
Okay, so these new smart meters, they can just be switched from credit to prepayment at the flick of a switch, presumably, but the old style was literally a change of a meter. So if a tenant under the old system moves into a property and it has a credit meter, sorry, then they would ordinarily just continue on that tariff.
Yeah, currently, if they move into a property that's got a, as you say, credit meter, sometimes, depending on who the provider is, they won't change it to a prepayment meter. So the tenant's got no choice but to continue with that if they want to stay with that provider. And sometimes it's very difficult to get a new provider, particularly now with the energy cap and everything else, to change provider and to put a different meter in.
Okay. I guess I'm thinking from the perspective of credit meters, the tariffs are more affordable, and one of the kind of major pieces of advice within kind of working with people on low incomes is do what you can to stay or kind of get onto credit meters, because that's going to be much better for your household finances. I guess my question around the perspective of a new tenant moving in is that under the old system, if they had a credit meter in their property, they will continue on that tariff, which is the one that's going to be most affordable for them, it's going to cost them the least. Under this new system, they're going to default to a prepayment meter. They're not.
As I say, they will have the choice to change it, and because it's a smart meter...
But when they move in...
Yes.
It will be defaulted to prepayment?
Yes.
And if they've got any bad credit history or issues with debts, then they're probably not going to be able to change that over to a prepayment meter.
Yeah, I can't answer that question in terms of what their credit history and their debt history is. So yeah, they may not be able to, depending on their personal circumstances.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess that's where my concern comes in, is that my question would be, is this process potentially making some new incoming tenants financially worse off? I think it possibly is. So that's kind of one concern I would have. As much as I appreciate there are significant benefits to the council and to the efficiency of the service and the perspective of the landlord, I'm just trying to bring it back to that perspective from the tenant. And just following on from that, I know at the end of the report it talks about the council securing an estimated income from utility of around £36,000 for allowing this process to take place. I guess the question I would put is, could that £36,000 or potentially more be ring-fenced into a fund that is specifically for the provision of energy top-ups to council tenants, in addition to what's already provided, to try and kind of offset any financial difficulties?
Thank you, Becca. The law, ladies and gentlemen, what are we allowed to do? I mean, what are the rules within which we work on these things?
I mean, the easiest thing to say is that any savings, however they're derived, will be ring-fenced within the HRA, and there will be choices available to you as to how you set the budget going forward. So I wouldn't. So you have choice. Probably worth noting that the HRA, as you will know, the budget position in the HRA remains under pressure. So any saving we make will be a helpful contribution to the deficit position that we're in. But as ever, you will have the choice and decisions around how you set the budget going forward. At the minute, though, that any efficiencies just ring-fence the HRA.
Cal, I will come back to this point if that's okay. Thank you for raising it. Did you have any more questions or comments at all?
No, just a final comment, given the advice seems to be that
you do what you like.
Within your gift to do that, my suggestion would be that at least £36,000 is ring-fenced for the provision of energy top-ups towards council tenants, in addition to any existing funds in that's out there.
I take on board your point. Thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you, Councillor Sanders. I just wondered if there are other local authorities that currently use Utilita and if we have any feedback about how their services have been there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We are aware that there are other local authorities and housing associations using this current service. I've only spoken to one other, but I have spoken to an organisation called Together Housing. They're based up in the northwest, around Blackburn, but they do manage approximately 36,000 homes. They've had an arrangement and have been working with Utilita for a number of years, so pre-COVID. Their relationship is positive, and particularly around their tenant customer satisfaction with the process. They've had no issues whatsoever with the service and with the tenants either staying with Utilita or having the ability to change. And as you say, I think it is around the ability to, once you've got the smart meter on site in the property, you can switch from prepayment to credit or to another provider very easily. But they're the only people I've spoken to, but they're Together Housing.
Okay, I think the other feedback that we did had was the positive experience from the residents in terms of we've heard a number of the story that Maria mentioned about her experience with void properties and the confusion, the delay, etc. I know that a number of my energy team supported Maria in the attempts to get resolution to the issues, but the advantage that residents were coming back to, the positive nature that residents were experiencing, was fed back to us by the housing association. The other bit that we were also interested in is that that Utilita are working closely with the contractors that provide the service, and the contractor then was doing work on behalf of Utilita in terms of the smart meters, etc. So making the system more efficient, quicker, etc. And actually the company had taken on additional local labour to actually help Utilita in the area do the work as well. So there were a number, their relationship was well established, and from our point of view, we want to learn what they can do locally. But then when we look at perhaps sharing this with the marketplace, actually we're very much informed of actually what we want to weave into the contract and get service providers to deliver for us, because that was something that I think there were 3 or 4 other companies that deliver this type of service. None of those were doing that for residents that we'd spoken to previously. So that was positive, that we wanted to take forward as well.
Did you have any more comments or questions, Charlotte? No? Okay, thank you very much. Right. The reason I mentioned commercial confidentiality earlier on is because I first became interested in this issue way back in 2018, when I was looking through all the cabinet papers that led to the decision by our predecessors to go with the Victory Energy project. And tucked away in one of those commercial dependencies was this type of scheme, the idea of actually replacing our previous contractors with a regime like this. And so I was interested in how we could actually do that better, because from reading those papers it felt to me as if that was not the right way forwards, partly because of their business model, and I can bore people rigid with that, but not today. So I am interested in Cal's points, because I am interested in making sure there is a smooth a path for tenants as possible. Since 2018, the energy market has collapsed as various people, including various councils, have gone with completely the wrong model and suffered as a result, and I don't want that happening here. So I think there are 2 points that relate, for me, that relate to what Cal is saying. The first is, when in the process is the tenant contacted around, do you have a credit meter? Do you have a prepayment meter? Because it feels to me that the earlier that they're contacted about this, the less likely the situation Cal mentions arises. Won't happen all the time. There will be 1 or 2 people. They will come to all of us as local councillors, and we will go, what's wrong here then? But I think early contact with people to assess that situation, particularly if they've got lousy credit history, is really helpful. And I think in the vast majority of cases may stop the problems that Cal has rightly outlined. I think as part of the first 5-way chat, which I would hope will be after 3 to 4 months or so, colleagues, we can review whether what Cal has said will happen, happens. If it is happening to any great extent, then what Cal has suggested about where the money goes, we may need to use. So at the moment, Cal, that's disappearing into my back pocket, being blunt, because I don't know. I don't know if you're right. I don't want to spend £36,000 if I don't have to, knowing, as we all know, the budget position here, and knowing how local authorities are left, right and centre are going down the pan because of poor financial management. But it is a valid point, and so it is now in my back pocket. And if I have to use it, I will. But I think the 3-month review is probably a good point to check and see if Cal is right or not. But the key point remains is that this has got, as a result of learning from the Victory Energy reading, this has got to be better for the tenant than what has gone before. I think it will be, with a few tweaks, but the important thing is to make sure it actually pans out in the wash. And that's where I think the first more detailed 3-month, 5-way review with me and my opposition spokespeople will be very handy. Because if you find it ain't happening, we don't need to do anything. So Cal, thank you very much indeed for those points. That's very kind of you. Daniel, thank you very much for your points as well. I'm very grateful, and we'll have a chat outside this meeting to fix that, because we don't want people to be punished for poor energy. So with those minor caveats, I'm happy to proceed, but it should be noted that we will review, the various spokespeople will review this after 3 months in a more confidential format. And also that we will, a report on whether to, a public report on to whether to pursue this, will be back here within 12 months. Okay. So, thank you very much indeed, colleagues, for putting up with my ramblings. That is the last item. I'm incredibly grateful to you for your time, and I'm Alison. I'm closing the meeting at 10:25 a.m.